Everybody, it's Robin Robbins. Welcome to another Titans interview. I am here with Peter Melby. He is the CEO of New Charter Technologies. They're a massive MSP platform. They have over 1,200 employees. I can't even imagine. I'm over 100 and I can't handle it. In 40 offices across America, and they're serving small, mid-sized market businesses in several vertical markets like healthcare, manufacturing, local government, professional services, education, and nonprofits. They anticipate revenue to be about $375 million this year, which is just phenomenal. And Peter is known for his innovative leadership in the MSP industry. He founded his own MSP, CEO of a Denver-based Greystone Technology, and under his leadership has brought 7 Inc. 5000 recognitions and 9 top workplace awards. He is a seasoned speaker on MSP growth, organizational culture, IT innovation, M&A, and cybersecurity. And his experience has navigated. He's been in this industry when there were times are really tough, and he's navigated periods of like over things like COVID and recessions. He's also driven periods of very rapid growth and has seen a lot and done a lot there. And has it just aligns with New Charter's sustained expansion and success in the MSP landscape. So, Peter, I am super excited to talk to you today. I mean, $375 million is massive, right? And so, welcome to the call, I guess.
Well, thanks, Robin. Thanks for having me. I don't know who wrote that, but I feel like after hearing it, I should probably just sign off and be done,
Yeah.
and rather than disappoint. But no, it's been quite the journey over the past 25 years in this industry. The first interaction I had with you was at an ASCII event outside of Chicago.
Oh, no way, really?
Oh, yeah. But back when you were selling the notebook,
Yeah.
and doing that presentation. And so I love to see where not just the businesses have come from, but also this whole industry. It's changed so much, and I'm so impressed by what's developed and what we're able to do through it. So I can't wait to have the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, even this Titans interview, I mean, part of what we did in these interview series and what we did with the gala, we had a big Titans gala in LA last year to celebrate the success of MSPs. But I do think MSPs have sort of risen up from the plumbers of the business world, so to speak, where it was like, okay, oh, that's IT, have them talk to the office manager, or, you're like a step above the Maytag repair guy when the plumbing doesn't work, refrigerator doesn't work. Oh, the server over there, oh, call that guy, right? And with cybersecurity and the dependence so many businesses now have on IT, it's not something that's just, you're not just in a cost center anymore. It's a very critical aspect of business today. So, it has come a long way, and it's funny that, so yeah, tell me, so you were, you're the CEO. Tell me a little bit about Greystone? So you started that like on your own and grew it, and then you sold it to New Charter, or give me a little bit of that history.
Yeah, everything's intertwined, of course. But so I started Greystone with my business partner in Denver in 2001. And we built an MSP with the focus of how do we scale with people as the building blocks. Two things that have always driven me is, number one, I love to build. And I found the passion actually had an early passion for computers, but found the passion for building at scale with people as the building blocks, and what that really meant. Very unique challenge, as all of us have seen in the MSP space. So I love to build. I love to build with people as the building blocks. And then the other thing that drives me is that I love to do what no one else is doing, and what no one else seems capable of doing. And so those are my passions, and what fuels me every day when I get up. So we started Greystone with this idea that if we focused differently on the people aspect of the business, we'd be able to grow differently. And through a myriad of ups and downs, and obviously all of the things in business that are never straight lines, we built $20 million MSP in Denver, and we we, like a lot of people, were really interested in what exit opportunities there were, or what next level opportunities there were, and we didn't like the options out there. We saw a lot of the acquisitions that happened in markets just destroy the soul of the companies that they bought.
Right.
And I think it's the fear that we've all experienced. We've all lived it. We've also, most of us, enjoyed the experience when one of our competitors gets acquired, and things don't go well, and all of a sudden they start hemorrhaging employees and clients, and that means we get new employees and clients, and so we were on the side of that, for a while, that made us realize that we just don't want that fate for our own organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so through a lot of conversations, Mitch Morgan, the founder of New Charter, had the very similar ideas, similar experiences with a lot of the MSPs that he was advising. And we just had this question of, is there a better way to do it? Is there a different way? And what we found is that yes, there is, but it like most things requires a fundamental rethinking kind of from the ground up. Everything from, how we bring companies on board, how we create value together, and then how we structure the investment pieces. We're private equity backed, which brings its own unique situations, but there's such a fantastic alignment in terms of where we're going. And that's what we really worked, and what Mitch really, dedicated himself at the beginning to achieve. So we joined the platform as Greystone back in 2020, and then just this past year, Mitch passed the CEO baton to me, and we've been moving fast in terms of really cementing our mission and updating our vision to what it looks like for the next 5 and 10 years in this business.
Okay, great. And so start in 2001, you sell it in 2020, join the platform. I think you're the chief revenue officer, now the CEO. And New Charter is a little unique, right? Because you acquire MSPs, but you allow them to maintain their local branding and their culture. And is that correct?
Yeah, I think, at the beginning, candidly, we had a little bit more of a vision of, from an integration perspective, what we didn't want to do than what we did want to do. And a lot of it was based on those lessons that we had learned. But the misnomer that's been in the market for a while is just that we don't integrate, and that we're a holding company for these businesses. Our mantra is that we integrate for value, not for vanity.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything's on the table for integration, but it has to follow the value, and not just, it's easy to look at, especially an investor sponsored platform, and say, well, it's the investor value or the shareholder value in that. But in our industry, we've mapped this out where shareholder value only increases over, a long period and in a sustained way if we build value for the customer. And we build value for the customer by building the great teams and building value for our teams. Mm-hmm. And so the alignment that we have in this is not that we don't integrate or that we just leave things alone. It's that all of our changes, consider our value chain with the customer and the employees at the top.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because it's different than most other private equity firms that are rolling up MSPs, and it's just like a formula, right? You acquire it at this price, it's at the buy, you're going to churn this many customers, you take them, you plug them in, it's just kind of like to a formula, right?
Exactly.
And when I say formula, I mean, everybody has a formula, but their formula is really just about shareholder value and doesn't really take into consideration human beings. It's more of just the math formula, if you will.
Exactly.
And I think you guys take a different approach.
We do. So, Oval Partners is our sponsor, and they're the perfect sponsor, for this early stage of the organization, because they come from, very sophisticated private equity, but they're investing a lot of their own money in this, and so they recognize the value that people play in this industry. And we have, very, very close relationships, great open discussions, around this. And obviously their job is to use money to make money. Mm-hmm. But they recognize that in this industry, that money follows the people. And they recognize that you can't suffocate a business by just smashing businesses together on a spreadsheet and saying that here's the value we're creating, that the value is really in the market. And so that's, I think that's one of the things that gets lost sometimes when there's a disconnect between, investor and operator in those spaces.
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. So let me roll you back, because a lot of people watching this may be where you were in 2001. You're just starting this thing up. I mean, did you have a background in business? Did you have a mentor? Or did you just like start this business because you like technology? I mean, kind of give me that story.
It's kind of worse than all of those, actually. I dropped out of college, which is not, uncommon, but my dad's a college professor. And so I had this conversation with him to say, hey, I don't, I want to go see about this IT thing. So yeah, I'm going to take a break. And I'll say that especially at this, stage, it's easy to have revisionist history and turn around and say, wow, look at what I was a visionary, all these things. I was not. I was a kid in college that didn't like doing homework and was more excited about computers. And then I saw people being interested in paying me to fix their computers, or show them how to operate things. And that became, something that was just more interesting to me. So I stopped going to class, and rather than the easier conversation with my dad was, hey, I'm going to go do this business thing, not, hey, I lost my scholarship.
Mhm.
So that was the advent of it. Now, what I will say is that sometimes we make good decisions, but sometimes we have to make our decisions good. And in this case, it was the latter, where I woke up one day and said, oh, I shouldn't have done this, but I'm stuck. And I really had no other option but to work my way out of it. And so I learned work ethic by dropping out of college and having to prove to myself, my parents, those around me, and maybe most importantly, my bank account,
Mhm.
that I could make this work. And so the scrappiness, I was always creative. I had an entrepreneurial mindset. I loved people. And I was smart with the technology, but I had to get scrappy.
Mhm.
And so those early years where it was, answering the phones, on call all the time, fixing the technology, doing the sales meetings, the invoicing, all of those different pieces gave me such a respect for what it takes to really drive success in a business.
Mhm.
It also taught me some really bad habits that I've, worked to undo over the past 25 years, where I definitely can't do all of it myself.
Yeah.
Um,
How long did it take you to get from like you start? Like, how long did it take you to break the $1 million mark?
yeah. So the first million, I think it was probably year 7 or 8. We
Okay.
hit the $1 million mark. It was a slow go at the beginning, and actually it might have even been longer than that. I knew I wanted to hit it before I was 30. Um, and I wanted to hit 10 million before, I was 40, and now I want to hit 1 billion before I'm 50. So, it's, we'll see how that goes. But um, it was a lot of trial and error at the beginning. And obviously in the early 2000s, there was no MSP industry. There were, IT service providers, there were VARs, there were,
Bars. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was very, very new, and I didn't have any history in that. We were not a VAR. We were a service organization, and that probably helped us the most by recognizing that our calling card was deeply engaged and deeply embedded services with our customers,
Hmm.
and that became the thing that carried us, all the way through now.
Yeah. And I'll ask you about 1 million to 10 and some of the, but like from the 0 to 1 million, you said there's a lot of trial and error. It took you about 7 years, somewhere in that realm. Like, if you look back, what were the things, like, what were 2 or 3 things that you were like, you know what, that's what really held me back? This is the way I was. Were you too cheap about it, hiring people? Were you hiring the wrong people? Were you pricing things too low? Were you not doing marketing? Like, what were the things that, if you were to go back and you could do it faster, I'm sure this time we all could, right? Like, what were the things that you did that held you back?
Yeah, great question. Two things: not having the confidence to price our services where they should have been,
Hmm.
and simultaneously not understanding what it means to hire your number two.
Hmm.
That first hire, was that was a big trial and error thing for us, where in our early career, I mean, they didn't have a lot of experience in management, talent evaluation, things like that. And we would go to the tech schools and say, hey, where are the brightest students? Let's find the smartest people. We realized that, especially with that first hire, it was not about having the smartest technical person. It was about having the person who knew how to be accountable to customers, knew how to be accountable for value that they were creating and had that deep, connection, ability. And at the end of the day, they weren't going to let things go until they were successful. Mm-hmm. And so we didn't realize that until the fourth time we tried to hire, our first person. We finally realized that it's not about what's on paper. It's about, can you put them in front of an angry CEO and they know how to build value. They know how to bring that situation to where it needs to go. And that costs us a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So not pricing services or just lack of confidence in charging what you need to charge, and then hiring people. That's all. I think that's always the big issue. It's like one of those things you can read a million books on leadership, but it's until you actually hire a person or 2 people or 10 people or 20 people, and you've got to deal with human beings and all the stuff that comes with the good and the bad that comes, with that. It's tough. I think that's the bottleneck to growth for a lot of companies, and you just tempted to put a body in there, and then it's a mess. What did you do for like getting customers early on? Like at what point did you hire a salesperson? Like, and obviously word of mouth and referrals, but I mean, what did you kind of figure out that once you started getting the business going, how did you start getting customers in the door?
Yeah. So we were and still are a very connection and relationship oriented business. And so I would say in the early days, hey, we're not going, executing a sales process. We're participating in a job interview with these potential customers. They're hiring us for a position on their org chart. And so the first thing that we did was recognize that through that lens, we couldn't afford to just send, a schmoozy salesperson, into the mix. And I would always joke about it. I would even tell the potential customer, like, yeah, you're not going to see any, salespeople here. We're going to introduce you to, our team, the people that you're going to have a relationship with, account management, service delivery, because you're interviewing us, and you'd never hire someone to do your job interview for you, and so you need to get to know us through this process. And so early, in those years, we loved competing against people who had a very traditional view of sales, because they would just miss the mark on that trust building. And so we've actually, continued to infuse a lot of those things throughout the years. Now, I was also the person that would make big, bold statements like, we're never hiring a salesperson. I said that when we were 8 people. You got 100 salespeople at this point. There's not, that obviously didn't age extremely well. But the idea was, when we got into the realm of, 8 people, we said, okay, we need someone who really is just the external relationship, coordinator, manager. And they were more or less your farmer of a salesperson.
Account manager.
So, yeah. And they were focused on, new closes, and new logos, but we would just always paint it through that frame of, you're here to support the customer. You're not here. We didn't have quotas for a long time. What we finally realized in that is that those values and that perspective remained true and still remains true. But that the structure that we can create, is multifaceted. So as we moved through the sales process, things got very different. But the number one thing I say, I've got a hierarchy, of what MSPs need to do in order to be able to grow. And the number one thing is services that people want to refer. And so that was number one, is to say, I don't want to sell anybody on anything. I want to educate them on why they are best suited to go with us. And then the second thing is really strong executive level relationships, in your market and in your community, and And once you have those two things, then you can hire and bring people in, and bring them into an ecosystem that has some substance rather than just hiring one person and saying, hey, I'm going to offload all of this to you. Good luck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think sales is, what I find, and I'd love to get your comments on this, because it sounds to me like you had a little bit of salesmanship in you, in the sense that some people are just not afraid to sell. But what I find with a lot of the smaller MSPs, a lot of it's owner-led sales. So the owner's the one doing all the sales. But there's some out there that they don't understand sales. They've never read a book on selling, never taken a course on selling, never carried a quota at another company, I think that's an advantage I had. Like, I was a salesperson and carried a quota, and that mindset helped me to be an entrepreneur better, because, you eat last. When you're an entrepreneur, you got to pay everybody first and you eat last. Right. And so, so I'm just curious, like, and you now deal with a lot of other, MSPs out there. Like, so if somebody's sitting here and they're watching this and they're under 1 million, or maybe they're at 2 million, or wherever they are, and they're trying to get to that 5 million mark, should they continue to own sales? Should they hire people? Like, kind of, how do you recommend they start moving beyond just, I get a referral and I close it because the person trusts me? Like, how do they walk through that? Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So it's interesting, because if you look at, if I go back to the early stages of how I would sell and how I would communicate with people, at the end of the day, I never felt like I was selling. And so but one of the things you said about, okay, you've got an, owner-led sales, they haven't led anyone who's on quota. They might not, have ever had a quota position themselves, but I'll say every entrepreneur's been on a quota, whether they realize it or not, because, even if it's just your bank account or what you're the nut that you have to cover, all of those things. And so where owners make great salespeople is that they know their services because they built them. They can speak intelligently about the value that it creates because they built based on that connection to the value in the market. And they feel the pressure. And so they're driven, in that. Now, they might not have the traditional sales skills, in all of that, but that's pretty magical, in the sales process is, you've got the motivation, you've got the knowledge, and you've got the ability to connect the dots, and communicate with confidence in that. Those are the things that need to be replicated. And so I tell people all the time, even when we acquire a company, if the owner is heavily involved in sales, to say we really need to scale beyond that. We say, absolutely, you do. And here's the hierarchy of the things that we need to be able to do in every one of our markets. Community engagement is so important, all this. But here's the places where you still play. You're still going to be the most important person to make these introductions, or to, so it's less about getting the owner out of the sales process and more about how you build an ecosystem that, that has layers that address those things, that are needed. And what you find, and what I found, is that I wasn't particularly good at asking for the money. Because while I was confident about my services, I also knew all the problems. And so I would negotiate against myself in my head, because and I was like, oh, well, what if they say no? I need to make, to pay this bill. And so I'd short myself at times, or I wouldn't have that level of confidence. So bringing someone in to where I would then play a sub role, I'd do an introduction. I'd set the tone. Hey, this is our company. It's what we want to do. I'm going to introduce you, to this person. They're going to take you through this process. They're going to introduce you to these people, along the way. And I'm going to make sure that you get everything that you need. And so that executive relationship stayed, but there was someone in that seat who was frankly better, at the mechanics of it, than
selling, quoting, selling, handling objections, that sort of.
Exactly. And so it was always that layer approach, and still is, where they look at it and say, okay, well, maybe they don't really hit it off with the salesperson, but they got to talk to a senior executive, or they're working with, they get introduced to an account manager, that sits in the sales meeting so that there's some continuity in the process. And so the thing that I'll say is, and it is hard, the smaller that you are, where you can't just all of a sudden have 4 roles that participate in all of these areas, but use the people that you have that already have trust in your organization. They're already building trust with customers. So I wouldn't pull our technicians too far away from the service. But if there was a key client when we were, a key potential client when we were 7, 8, 9, 10 people, I would bring my best tech to that meeting. And I would give them an opportunity to talk through that. The tech wasn't the salesperson, but I wasn't the performer. I was the facilitator and the educator, in that.
So a team of, it's kind of interesting. There was have you read the book Moneyball, or have you seen the movie Moneyball? Yeah. So what you're just saying there kind of reminded me. I just had Billy Bean, who's the actual guy, of that book and the movie's all about. And I just interviewed him at our Producers Club meeting. And he's, because if you know the story, the Oakland A's, they didn't have the budget to hire the best people. So they had to hire people. Well, there's a couple things. One, they had to hire, they hired based on data instead of like gut feel. And, this guy's got good looks, and he's tall, and he comes from a good school, and he's athletic, and he can run. So they would make those decisions, but started doing a more data-driven approach to building a team. But one of the things he said that was kind of interesting is he said, there were times when we needed somebody who was really good on the team, but we couldn't afford let's say a whole person that could do the whole job. And he said, so we would hire 2 people that were maybe like, this guy was like 40%, this guy was 60%. And by teaming them up, we basically strengthened the team. And what I think I hear you saying is, you recognize where you were weak, and you said, okay, well, I'm good at building the relationship and being the executive and saying, hey, I'm the guy. Anything goes wrong, you call me, and we care, and here's our vision, and here's our culture, and selling the caring part, if you will, the trust part. But then you bring in the sales guy who can do the negotiations and quote the price, and not kind of go like work against yourself. Like you said, that'll like, hey, don't quote anything less than this, because we all have our weaknesses. You want to, I like this guy, I'm going to give him a discount. You shouldn't, but you do, So I think it's what I hear you saying is you start building this team of people who work together to close these sales, instead of just finding that one rock star salesperson who can do it all, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm going to share an opinion that, Rob, you may completely disagree with.
That's fine. Yeah, please.
I will say that what was effective for me at the beginning was to not individualize quota and incentives, but to actually make it a team quota. Okay. Because what you talk about, in terms of, okay, 40% here, 60% here, in the early stages of that, it's very easy to get caught up in the mechanics of, okay, well, am I in my lane? Are they in their lane? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And really what matters is the customer and the value that's being created for the customer. And what I found was that our team, when we had a shared quota, across the team, that it tore down those barriers until, frankly, we were mature enough to reinstitute some of those individual pieces, and we knew what we were doing in those individual lanes. But by doing that, we created this really fun sales culture that was competitive, compared to quota, but not competitive with each other at the beginning. And now we have a sales culture where there is some really positive, healthy competition, even with each other across markets, and things like that. But in the early days, it was great to not worry that we would create negative competitiveness, and to really just create that camaraderie around. And we would still incentivize, on it. We had to manage effectively in that to make sure that there wasn't dead weight, that it wasn't just one person who was out, who was carrying the whole team along. But in the early stages, that was valuable for us in terms of just building, that cohesive, group. And then our effective processes came out of that.
So when you say team quota, so was that everybody, there was a dollar amount that the company had to produce, like whatever new MRR, ARR, however you measured it, project sales, And was it like, okay, you got a salesperson, you've got a technical person that might be assisting, like were they all shared that, knowing that that was a quota that they were supposed to help with? I'm just curious, like, did they get a bonus, a spiff, a commission? Like, how did you share in the success there?
So the people who were most, I mean, whose roles were really focused on sales, they had a full comp plan, that was based on quota. The quota was just for the whole team, and so it wasn't go close this deal individually. So if we had someone on the technical sales side, a sales coordinator, sales, leader, and we were building that piece, it was based on group performance, but they each had their scale of what that meant quarterly in terms of what their bonus would be or their compensation would be.
So part of their comp was based on the team hitting this quota. However, not necessarily a percentage of that particular sale, but in general. Is that
correct? Yeah, exactly. It was based on, hey, this amount of MRR every month, and you will hit these thresholds. With the people who were not consistent players, we'd pull someone into a sales deal. That was more of a spot bonus type structure where we said, hey, come do this, and you'll benefit from it, but it's more of a one-off.
Yeah, and I love it. It's like it's funny because sometimes when I interview not just people like you, but I talk to other people who are known in the industry, and they'll say, you probably disagree with this, or I don't want to like kill your sacred cows. And I always say, look, I don't have sacred cows, because if there is a better way out there, I may just not have heard of it. And I'm always looking to like, show me when you take your ego out of it, like it's not about me being right. It's about I'm always more interested in finding the best way, if that means, and I do think sometimes there's more than one way to be right about things, there's definitely best practices, but there's kind of more than what, like, I think there's certain decisions you make that have pros and cons. And so there's no perfect solution. You're just picking your pros and cons that you can live with or that you like. So just always know that about me. Like,
I mean, that's the entrepreneurial scrappiness, is that you can have all the processes that you want, but at the end of the day, it's about how are you getting the business and are you getting the business? And I can appreciate that. And also the seasonality of it, recognizing that was right for our business, in those early stages. And I don't regret it, but that was a lot, because, of where we sit with, now we can look back and say, oh, yep, that was the path that worked, and so I'll give that advice all day from this is what worked for us,
Right. Sure. So you get to this $1 million mark, and like, what was the next hurdle? Was 5 million the big nut for you? Was 10 million? Like, what was the next kind of big, like, that was a really hard one to get over, and why?
I don't know if I remember the exact dollar amount, but I'll tell you what happened between 1 million and 10 that was both devastating and game changing for us. And that was, I do a seminar that I've done in a lot of the MSP spaces called Boss or Babysitter, where I walk people through this journey and what we learned specifically in the $1 to $10 million window. And it's where I say that my good intentions, the idea of succeeding through good intentions expired between 1 million and 10 million. And especially when it came to what I talked about at the beginning with the people aspect. When we had, 6, 8, 10 people, I knew everybody, and they reported to me. It was a big, group. We liked working together. There was, I didn't have to go far to understand what was going on in the business. And I could also build very personal trust, in those spaces. What I learned when we started building layers beyond that and scaling beyond that is that I couldn't just rely on my relationship with it, and that my intentions that I thought were obvious, that I have good intentions for everybody, trying my best, all of that, were very quickly misunderstood, and in some ways, distorted. And that's the saying that I say a lot, is that what I learned is that on a long enough timeline, every company culture succumbs to the laws of human nature. And so there's this that was devastating on one hand because I looked at it and I actually ended up with some pretty significant cultural toxicity issues. And I was very betrayed by that because that wasn't that wasn't who I was. That wasn't, it was all based on either misunderstandings or misrepresentations and things that I thought were completely unfair. Realize it doesn't matter how unfair it is when you're the CEO. And it also doesn't matter how good the intentions were if they don't come across and they aren't embedded in the values of the organization. And most importantly, how the organization operates. And that's what $1 to $10 million really became for us, is how do we rescue from this cultural toxicity that was truly accidental and something that, I was very troubled by, reclaim our approach to being a people first organization, but in a new way, and make it programmatic, make it really connected to how our people did operate, not just how I wish they would, and what really would motivate people and influence people, not just what I thought should matter to them. And so that was the season where we had to go from this being just, I have good intentions, we have, a good model, we're saying the right things, we're caring about people, we're doing our best, to here are the ways that we operate together, and here are the ways that we set this up. And that, it was the most painful, part of the experience for me. I don't look back on that with a lot of, I don't think about it and think of joy when I think of that season. But I also know that we wouldn't be where we are now without such a different experience during that.
We had to go through it. It's almost like, I think every entrepreneur, when I say every, I'm going to say this based on the people I've talked to. I'm sure there's some unicorn out there that just breezes through this culture and people thing as you grow. But, I think I went through the same thing early on. It was one of the most painful times of running my business, where I hadn't figured out hiring and managing of people. And I was, you think, well, I'll just pay them more, or I'll offer them a bonus and that'll fix it. Right. I mean,
right.
Or you just, whatever, you just think, well, why, of course they should know that. Like, there's a lot of assumptions you make. So, and when you don't know that and you're adding people and you're trying to grow, it is extremely painful. So I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through that, and you figure it out or you don't. And if you don't figure it out, you don't grow. You
don't grow. Exactly. And honestly, I think those challenges are why there's such a ceiling, in this industry, is that, in terms of scale. And I remember, at $5 million or at $20 million, it's still a small business by government standards, by the government definitions, of what a small business is. But it's massive in this space. And I think it's because of that people aspect, not because we're incapable of building, beyond that, but the structures that work in the small spaces don't work for people, in the larger spaces. And I do think that growth, tends to slow if you don't really reorient, how you address the people issues.
So give me some specifics. Like, what did you do? Did you hire better leaders? Did you give me some specific tactics? So when you were going through that horrible period of culture and trying to get everyone, give me some very tactical, specific things that the people watching this can take away.
Yeah. So there's 4 things that we dialed in on. The first one, I say this, it's definitely controversial. I think core values are overrated.
Okay.
And I think that in the way that most people have written core values, is that you have these lofty words or phrases that are well-meaning. But let's take the easy marks, integrity, as a core value. Really good core value, really important, thing there. No organization, has, dishonesty, as something that they aspire to. So integrity doesn't really set you apart, and it doesn't really provide anything for your team other than a word on the wall, And so what we've recognized is that when you have those things that can be misinterpreted, you have 2 people who come to you with a situation, and you need, and trust, is one of your core values. It's like, well, which one of them do you trust? They're talking about the same thing, but they have entirely different perspectives, and they're, so how do you sort through those really obtuse and vague, core values? So what we do, what I talk about a lot is we have a citizenship statement, and the statement is our agreements, and they can be aligned in themes, according to core values, and things like that. But ultimately, they're the ways that we agree that we are going to act in the organization, and so they're written, in that way, and it's definitely more detailed, than just, a word or two, but like one of the things in our citizenship statement is when we have a problem with something, we talk to someone who can do something about it before we talk to someone who can't. And, it's just, there's a level of specificity, but also maturity. Like I'm never going to expect that I can, remove the inner workplace conversations that happen when people are frustrated, and all of these things. Like I don't want to. It doesn't serve me well to have no relationships between my employees. But I need them to understand that we agree that if we have a problem, that it has to go to someone who can do something. And so that level, of specificity, that we have has been very, very, valuable to us. And I don't need everybody to have, I don't need to put words painted on the wall, but I want people to understand and have our citizenship statement, have our constitution, in a lot of ways. And that's not something that we dictate as leadership. It's something that we participate in as leadership. There's an accountability aspect to being part of our organization.
Yeah. So I think when you say core values are overrated, I think it's not that the core values, I think it's just the way people communicate them. So I think what I hear from you is it's with us. Like we were literally just having this conversation. Jeff Johnson's president of the company. And we have a company, an all company update once a month. We get everybody on a Zoom meeting and we just kind of give them an update. And we picked different topics, but one of the things that we decided we needed to address again was one of our core values is no drama, period. But like you said, you say no drama, but people don't know what that means. So I literally am giving them a list. Okay, here's what drama, and it's funny because you said the same thing. Drama is when you walk into a coworker's office and you complain about somebody else at the company or the company itself, and that person can't do anything about it. So you're not only wasting their time, but you're now creating drama. We call it bitching up. So if you've got something to bitch about, you bitch up to your manager or to me. Like I tell everybody in my company, everybody in the company is welcome to come to me. You're not going to get in trouble skipping over your manager, because sometimes maybe your manager is the problem. And then if your manager is the problem, who do you go to? So I'm like, you can skip over everybody. You can talk to Nicole, who's my COO, Jeff, or myself. You can go to another leader in this organization and bitch up so that you're not
I like that a lot.
So because I tell them, if I catch you doing it, you get one warning. And the second time I catch you doing it, you're immediately terminated. And we have done that. We have literally walked into someone's office and said, I'm sorry, you're fired. This is a second warning. We told you not to. And they're shocked. And what it does is it sharpens everybody else up around them, because it's like, I wasn't joking when I said, I take this very serious. If there's something, I know we're not perfect. No place is perfect. I get that. But the way we make things better is you bitch up to somebody who can do something about it, not to a coworker and create drama, because you're interrupting their work. You're killing our culture. So I think what I hear you saying, same thing, is it's one thing to have culture, but you got to go the next level and say, okay, if excellence is a core value, you got to give examples of what excellence is. Here's what that means.
Yes. Because you just nailed it, in the sense that the other, is holding accountability to those things. Unless you have the specific definitions of the actions that you're looking for, then it's very hard to hire and fire based on that. Because success is, it's great, and obviously these are, some of the broader ones, but Ultimately, yes. And we've worked with a lot of companies who's like, hey, you do exactly what you do. You take your core values. That becomes the headlines on your your
Mhm.
citizenship statement that basically says, all right, and now here are the subcomponents to each of these things
Right.
that we're all agreeing on. So that citizenship piece was number one. Uh,
Hmm.
and the citizenship piece came in. I mean, we began giving that to in the job interview,
Hmm.
because there were some accountability pieces in that. People wanted to know what success looked like in the organization. And, if you bring someone in after they're not really adhering to what you need to do, but haven't really defined it very well, it feels punitive. It feels like, feels parental, in that.
Hmm. Hmm.
When you give it to someone in a job interview, they're like, oh, this is great. I can do these things,
Hmm.
and early alignment you know, to that is so strong.
Hmm.
The second thing that we endeavored to do was to cultivate psychological safety in the organization. Um, and that term has gotten a lot of traction, in the last 10 years,
Hmm.
but um, the ability for your employees to feel comfortable sharing their truth, I mean, and sharing what the reality, you know,
Hmm.
up ranks, down ranks, instead of using information, weaponizing it, using it as currency to that, point, using it to stir up drama. It's like, no, no,
Hmm.
no, let's talk about what's really happening in this, and cultivating psychological safety as an organization is not an automatic thing. It's not something that is very easy to just say, all right, everybody go be honest now.
Hmm.
Say this: if you and your significant other, your spouse or somebody, you're sitting down and having a dinner, and you're talking about the world, that all of the different things that are going on in your world, your level of authenticity in that conversation is usually quite high. you know
Hmm.
you add one other person to that mix, and what happens to the level of authenticity in that
Hmm.
conversation? Comes down to
Yeah.
a very, even if it's a close friend, it's much more surface. It's much more cordial. You add 50 people, and then you put it in the workplace where everyone's vying, for their livelihood, and that psychological safety just evaporates. And so how do you have leadership that cultivates that? We've got to, so we work through exercises in that to make, the feedback, the self-reflection pieces of that programmatic inside the organization. And so psychological safety is never something that you check the box on and say we did it, but it is a really, really important thing to cultivate.
I love that. I really love that because you're right. Because that's kind of what I never had anyone articulate it that way. I didn't articulate it that way. Like when I'm saying like, open door policy. Like I've always said to people, anybody in the company can come to me and tell me what's going on with their manager, and you will not get fired for it because I need to know. I need to
Mhm.
know if it's broken, if it's ugly, if it's a problem. You come to me and we will address it.
Yep.
And you're right, having that ability because there's times when I've talked to employees and I remind them like, guys, you think I know stuff. I can't see every conversation. I can't see everything that's going on. You see more than I do. And if you don't tell me, I can't fix what I don't know. Please don't assume I know everything that's going on. Right. And it's almost like you have to remind them that because they think, well, you're the owner. Of course, you know that guy's an asshole, and it's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
well, no,
Yeah.
I had no idea he was doing that because
Yeah.
I'm not in every meeting and people are good at hiding. Like what the
Yeah.
face to me, what they say to me, they're
Yep.
fine, but then to someone else. So I love that. I love that. Yeah. So how did you cultivate? Do you talk about it a lot? Do you,
So
you
there's
said,
there's two aspects of it, and actually, I'm gonna close my blind real fast. You can edit this part out.
yeah, no, that's fine.
Me a little better, not just the. Um. So the ways that we cultivate psychological safety, there's two things that we focus on. Number one is, I would say that self-reflection of our employees is an underutilized tool. And by self-reflection, I mean, what do they think of themselves? What do they think they're good at? What do they think they're struggling with? Because we'll have team members that come to work that will easily say, What I'm doing, is great, and they'll defend their performance and all of that, but they'll leave work and they won't feel great about it. They know they're not cutting it, but the stakes are high, so they're going to defend it. And so we always say, as a leader, your number one job, your first job is to understand where they stand with themselves and what they think about themselves and their performance, not what they're projecting in that. And the second piece of that that's really important that might seem counterintuitive is that we also have to criticize directly. They need to understand where we stand in that, and what we feel in that. And what we found over time is that when we really get to the bottom of this, most of the time the views align. Hey, this is what's working, this is what's not working. Let's figure out how to solve that. And then all of a sudden we're on the same side of the table. It really opens up different levels of conversation. And sometimes you find pretty massive misalignment. And I think that those areas of misalignment are really what I'm targeting in that, is say, oh, you think you're succeeding and I don't think you are. And now we need to communicate that openly, get it on the table and solve it together. That, and I would say, I'm not immune to this. If someone walks into my office and says, you are terrible at responding to my emails, my immediate reaction is defensiveness. Like, do you know everything I have to do as a CEO? I have all the stuff, because that's what's spiraling in my head at that point.
Sure.
But if you ask me what I wish I was better at, and what I've put processes in place for and all that, it's timely responses to things that may not be, incredibly urgent, but just not letting them fall off completely, And so I know it's a weakness. I know it's a challenge. Yet I don't want to admit that in the moment, because that's the human nature part.
Well, you feel attacked. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So being able to put, we have these, these monthly, performance management and employee engagement conversations that happen where there's just, there's 4 questions, that everybody answers, and they answer them in writing before you sit down, in the one-on-one, and it really gets things on the table, because, it's making that self-reflection and that direct, constructive feedback normalized. It's happening every month. There's always something that's going to come up. It's making those conversations very, very common. And that's the number one way that we've found the psychological safety, tends to build over time.
Okay. Excellent. All right. So I want to make sure we keep. So what's number 3? You said there's 4 things.
I'll roll through 3 and 4. And obviously I'm passionate about this stuff.
No, it's great. I love it. This is really good. So
third is what we call directed autonomy. And what we learned is that, we are our favorite employees, the ones that were just like, yeah, if we could just clone that person, they get it, they get where they're going, they get how to do the work, and they communicate well, in that. But they can work with autonomy because they understand the parameters in that. What we found is that, I had these employees say, oh, give us more autonomy or trust us more. I needed to trust my employees, but I didn't like what they were doing. So I can't give you freedom if you're going to use that freedom to go do something, that's opposite of what we need you to do. But what I learned over time is that freedom is not autonomy. Autonomy is actually, something that everybody craves, but people want safety nets in that too. And so if we can give them a very clear boundaries for the areas that they have autonomy in, then yes, make decisions, inside of this box that you're in, and own your outcomes, know what you're doing, but the direction is the guardrails, in that. And obviously the more senior the position, the fewer guardrails, the bigger the space is, but every position should have some level of critical thinking, I'm owning my outcomes, and that's how employees grow. Through a lot of that. So I recognize that I could actually still give people very clear direction and let them, engage with autonomy, in those spaces. And then the fourth thing was just what I call courageous empathy. Empathy is so important in a people-driven organization. The problem is that empathy can also be a scapegoat for not dealing with that issue that you really need to deal with in the organization. Oh, that one person, that one manager, how many good people do you lose because you tolerate, a poor performer or a toxic leader under the guise in your own head about, well, I'm being empathetic to them, and So I say empathy has to be applied at scale in that. And sometimes empathy is moving on from somebody. Sometimes empathy is, making a hard choice on that, both for the rest of the organization and a lot of times for that person, who's not aligned. And so when you set people up and they know exactly what they're supposed to be doing, they have the right boundaries, they're communicating openly, we're giving them, feedback, and then when they're not, cutting it, we're able to make the hard decisions, then the organization doesn't see a lot of pockets of misinformation, in that. And that's ultimately what we looked at and said, all right, that's the level that we need to be able to continue, as we build through, different mechanisms into different levels of scale.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's all about people directed. And let me kind of go back. So like the directed autonomy, just, I like to put it in, like, kind of explain it back, make sure I understand it, is you're right. There are people who go, I don't like to be micromanaged. You just don't watch what I do, and that's like the default saying. But there's people where it's like, I tell people, I can't not micromanage you until I know I can turn the other way and know you're going to do the same thing consistently, make good decisions, like what you're doing. Until then, I got to watch over everything you do because you haven't earned that yet. And I hate micromanaging. I don't want to micromanage, but I also can't give somebody a super critical project and know that they're likely to fail, because you just know they don't have the experience, they don't have the strategic viewpoint, they don't have the skills, to be able to make the decisions they need and so forth. So I think what you're saying there is, I'm going to give you it's like, here's your guidelines. As long as you don't go over this, as long as you don't do that, because I had somebody ask me the other day, they're like, are you kind of one of those people that everybody has to do the things your way? And I'm like, no, it's not that I want them to do my way. I want them to get the result. But I do think you have to have buy-in to how the result is gotten, because a lot of damage can be done. You can get a result, you can generate a lot of sales and burn a lot of customers at the same time, right? You know what I mean? So it can't.
Very true.
You've got to make sure that, okay, yes, we want the outcome. And there are like, you can't promise stuff we can't deliver, or you can't, I don't know, put pressure on people because now they're not, you got them to buy, but then they're going to regret it or whatever it is. Right. So I think what I hear you saying there is like, okay, you have some space, but you've got to make sure you're not doing these things. And the more you can trust people because they demonstrate that's the courageous empathy. It sounds to me, it's like one of the things I love is Jack Welch. I don't know if you've ever read anything Jack Welch, but I love his leadership books and his books in general, running a business. And he talks about just having candor with people, and candor, not in a rude way, but I respect you enough to tell you where you stand and not, lie to you. And I have enough respect for you that if you're not cutting it, I'm going to let you know. So if we have to part ways, you should nobody should ever be surprised if they're fired too. That's the other thing,
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
Because if you haven't had 3, 4, 5, 6 conversations about the thing that they're doing and have the conversation, look, this has to get fixed or else. And the or else is obviously going to be a termination. You're not giving coaching and feedback. But see, I think a lot of us, I say a lot of us, me as a leader, even, it's very tough to look somebody in the eye and be candid with them, because you might hurt their feelings and then they get defensive. And sometimes it's easier just to ignore it, like, oh, I'm so busy, I don't want to deal with people and their issues. But I think that's what I'm hearing in all this.
So here's what we did about that one, because I agree, so we have these 4 questions, once a month, in the frame of one, a pretty brief one-on-one, unless there's really something to dig into. But the last question is written down on the paper that the manager has to answer, is from, it's written from the perspective of the employee asking the question. It's like, am I meeting expectations in my job? But it's written on the paper. And so the manager has to write an answer to that. And so we basically said, all right, these are the candor, producing questions that should be asked, but they're awkward to ask. So let's just write them down and make sure that they're addressed every month. And when we do that, and something slips into that territory of, no, it's no longer meeting expectations, your manager is either going to have to be honest about that in a level that is very clear, or they're going to have to lie, in which case they're not doing their job. And so it's forcing the empathy. It's forcing the authenticity in a way that isn't trying to be manipulative. It's actually trying to bring out the truth, a bit more. And so it becomes a practice.
I like, because it also forces you to. Oh, sorry. I think we.
No.
Yeah. But I think what it also does is it kind of forces you back on, well, what are the expectations for this job?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because that can get lost. I know that sounds silly to people, but it can get lost. You're going so busy. You're so busy. You're so busy. Sometimes you have to stop and say, okay, wait a minute. What are we trying to accomplish around here? What are our key initiatives that we're really focusing on?
Yeah. I always ask employees, I make sure that when they understand their position and the purpose statement, in their position, say, can you tell me why the company pays you? Can you articulate to me what, and it's my job to make sure that they can. It's my job to make sure that that's communicated, but it's also my job to inspect that they understand what the value of their role is to the company and that they have that level of orientation to it, And yeah, this is the stuff I could talk about all day, but
I'm loving it. I'm like taking notes. So, I'm getting a free seminar here. Yeah, I think you should write a book about this. This is like really impactful. It very much
appreciate that. Thank you.
So, yeah. And so you said there's 4 questions. Do you mind sharing what the other 3 are? Because you said that's the last one. What are the other questions?
Yeah. So the questions on the employee side, actually the first thing we make the employee do is just rate their satisfaction and engagement, red, yellow, green. It's a very quick gauge, just to kind of calibrate the rest of it. Then we ask what they feel like they're succeeding at, and highlights what they're working to improve, so what are you working to improve? And that's that self-reflection. It's a very open way to say, yeah, I wish I was better at these things. The third is what roadblocks are in your way, in your position. And fourth is how can I support you better as a leader? So those are the questions that they answer once a month. The leader's questions then are what successes have you seen? So making sure that the leader is not just attuned to the failures, but the positives that are happening.
Meaning that person has accomplished.
What that person has accomplished.
Okay.
Where have you seen growth? Or have you seen growth since the last time? So, as we're talking about constant improvement, we're giving feedback, in that. The third one is, what should I adjust? Again, it's phrased that way to be direct, but very normal and common. We should be very, very clear with our people on a constant basis what they should adjust. Sometimes it's big things. Sometimes it's, hey, maybe don't wear that shirt that has the stains on it, to a client site,
right.
And then the fourth one is, am I meeting, failing to meet or exceeding expectations in my job?
Okay. And so the leader is asking this about that person. So where am I meeting? So are they're not self-reflecting. They're asking this.
They're answering the questions as if the employee was asking them, as if the employee was being vulnerable and saying, hey,
and answering
tell me, and yeah, exactly.
Right. This is really, really good. What I also like about this is you're able to spit these off, which tells me there's a system in place. And I think, even myself, there's checklists that I have to put together for myself for stuff I do on an ongoing, regular basis, right? Preparing for the sales meeting. Here's my checklist of things I'm going to look at, things I'm going to ask, because we can get so busy that you just kind of skip over things, right?
Yes.
So I love if you put it into a system, it helps everybody remember, but it also just makes it normal to be having these conversations where it's not like, okay, all of a sudden Robin's asking me, am I meeting expectations? Like, what, am I getting fired or what? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, and here, exactly. And for me, the secret that I must tell is that I built the system because I had the ideas, but I wasn't good at it. And I was the person who felt like I was communicating clearly about where people stood, about, these things. But I would learn, that if I needed to fire them, they were surprised that was on me, and so it was a system that I built for myself to hold me accountable, to some of the tough things in leadership. So that was really the cornerstone of driving from, a million to 10 million. And I don't think it was like one massive, hurdle. It was a series of hurdles, throughout that process.
Yeah. I mean, it was same for me. I mean, well, I'm good at sales and marketing. So sales and marketing was never mystery to me. People, budgets, process, I think that's really the challenge. When you really think about it, one of the reasons I think a lot of people don't succeed is it's not just people, it's people and it's 10 other things. It's being, you yourself being able to manage your time and priorities. It's good decision making. It's customer service. It's understanding your financials and your numbers and your metrics. It's systems and process. And all these are always, if you're growing, they're all always evolving. So the minute you figure one out, 3 more break because you just grew. And so you have to, revisit, okay, that didn't work. And so I think a lot of people, I think one of the things that's tough with being an entrepreneur is you have to be able to look over this very complex entity and be able to manage it. And a lot of people, they can't. It's like, it's overwhelming to them, and that overwhelm, that fear, that anxiety, the stress, everybody shrinks back and say, okay, I'm going to stay small because it's easy when I'm small and I have 3 employees and, getting another customer, because people come to us for marketing and like 9 times out of 10, the big they go, I need marketing, which marketing's not the problem. It's a symptom or it's a method, it's not the problem. The problem is they're scared to grow because they're like, okay, I got to spend money. And then that means I'm going to have to talk to customers. And that means what if it works? And then we're going to have to hire engineers. And then, you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
It's like a conversation I had the other day with a client. She's like, calls me up. She wants a 911 call. And she's like, okay, I think we're going to hit 5 million. And I said, that's great. What's the problem? She goes, I think we're going to hit 5 million. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, the anxiety. She's like, and I'm like, all right, it's, So it was good. Okay, well, let me do this because I want to be aware of the time. And I love everything you're saying. I think you really, honestly, you should write a book on this. I think
I appreciate that.
This would be not just for MSPs. I think all entrepreneurs would love this. They really would. And I read a lot of leadership books, and this is really kind of a fresh perspective. So I do like it a lot. Let me ask you this: like MSPs. So at the time we're recording this, we just came out of an election, and you and I were talking about, like, I don't know about you, but. And last Q3, Q4 really was tough for a lot of MSPs.
Yeah.
Like, and not everybody. Weather is always local. Some of them crushed it, but a lot of them struggled. And what do you think? Like, are you bullish or bearish? Like, what do you think is going to happen over the next year to 2 years? Do you think we're going to go into hyper growth? Do you think it's going to get a lot of competitive pressure with people feeling price pressure? Like, what do you kind of think MSP should be thinking about preparing for over the next couple of years?
Yeah, boy, I think timelines are going to get compressed. I think you look at the next 9 months for the rest of this year, and I think you could make an argument that it's going to be business as usual, in some spaces, from the sense that we're not going to see massive disruption in the market. We just need to go faster toward building customer value. And I do, based on what we're seeing things open up a bit more, so it's, there's more activity. People are buying stuff. It
is getting better.
Great, and I always tell my team, is like, we should pay attention to the election year piece. We shouldn't blame the election year piece.
Sure.
But I say that we've got to, change tactics based on what we're seeing in the market. So I do think that this will be a year with a bit more tailwind, but I think that tailwind will be a little bit of it'll be a little bit of a fallacy, because I think the tailwind is also then going to be followed up by a big change. And obviously AI and automation and these things are changing our world very quickly. And I predicted, in the very near future, we will see, where we have the spectrum commoditized services and very high value specialized services, and our service offerings kind of fit in the middle, of that somewhere, and I think there's going to be a rift and a chasm that's created there. I think there will be ultra commoditized services, and they will be more and more and more commoditized, automated.
Yeah, AI is going to take over the
Yeah.
basics. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
And there will be very high value services. So and the high value services will go to the organizations, the IT groups that talk about, kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of, can I use my position in this to actually change businesses, to, not just fix technology, but to change how businesses operate. And that's much harder thing than just being able to say, and IT has always had that opportunity, but never really seized it. That we see it a little bit with security. We're getting better at it with some of the VCIO services, but we're truly not, taking the place that I think we can take, which is honestly the place of some of your highest level business consultants, because you have the technology awareness and the technology aptitude, and everything's technology now. So if we're not then adding the consultative, high value skills in that, I think the tailwind is going to expire for people who are, not looking at it in that way. And so innovation is going to, the secret that I would say, MSPs hate innovation, which seems counterintuitive because it's technology, but no one likes to change, especially service businesses.
Right.
So it actually doesn't, it doesn't benefit us significantly, in those spaces. And so that's my view, is that it's going to be painful for the people who would rather things not change. And that's where we're intent on, being the leaders of change, not followers, of that change. So I think that it will be a bit of an easier year, but it's going to be followed by the haves and the have-nots, not even necessarily being based on the size of MSP, but really how much they're willing to embrace change and lead change.
Right. And add value in a different way. Because we were just we were just having this conversation at our Producers Club meeting, and there's a lot of people that are in our community, and they're telling us, they're like, look, we're really at the top of our price. Like, could we raise prices? Yeah, but there's a point where you're so high that the new customer acquisition sort of, there's a trade-off there. Let's just say, where you can price, yeah, but you're going to cut off your ability to get customers. And they said, with AI and the integration of platforms, I mean, we know what Kaseya has done. I believe ConnectWise is doing the same thing. There are going to be other newer innovators, competitors coming in there. I mean, they just do. I mean, they know there's going to be the cost of the platform being integrated with AI. I think the tools are, going to get better. They're going to get cheaper. There's going to be more AI, where you're either going to have those cheaper tools and offshore some of the support in order just to compete. That's kind of been, do you agree with that? Is that kind of where I'm talking about for like the lower end, like they were saying, no one's going to pay me $170 an hour to change a password or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, you will have to innovate and adopt innovation around those things in order to compete. Yeah. I think at some point, just competing is also going to be, you've got to figure out how to differentiate, and you really, and I say it's the differentiation is going to be, a challenge, for organizations that just they're listening to the industry tell them how to run the business instead of listening to the market tell them
to the customer. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Looking for those opportunities for sure. I mean, absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been phenomenal, Peter. Thank you so much. I mean, absolutely. We just kind of went in a different direction than
I know. We didn't even get into the new charter stuff much, but
not much. But it was. I hope that was okay. I mean, is there anything last parting words you want to give the audience who are watching?
I think the only thing I'll say is that obviously what I talked about, in terms of the people focus, they're the same principles that are allowing us to grow, 1,200 employees and beyond. And so the thing that I'm most grateful for in that those stages where I was so challenged and don't ever want to repeat, the lessons that I learned, is that they weren't just the lessons that carried us to 10 million. They were the lessons that spurred us, in what it took to create New Charter, what it takes to build New Charter forward, and really being a value-driven organization for the customer in a different way. And so it's the most valuable experience in my life that I never want to do again.
Yeah, once is enough. Hey,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
I don't need to go
Yeah.
on that ride again. Yeah, I did it, checked it off. Right. Yeah. So very
Yep.
good. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
This has been great. I
Thanks so
appreciate it.
much. I love the conversation.